What makes QRadar so special, and why is it that it's at the center of IBM's security intelligence strategy? Well, any SIEM has a correlation engine with some rules in it that allows it to take as input logs from applications and devices and events, and using those rules produces what some people call incidents, cases. We prefer to call those offenses. Now, what's the problem with that approach? Well, there are several. For one, is that this deployment takes forever. It requires to have some kind of a PhD on a particular tool, on the way that tool operates, and requires you to hire an army of people, which these days is something pretty expensive. People train on that specific tool. Second problem is that these systems generated tremendous level of false positive, which means they alert you about very many things that are not really that relevant, and that discourages a lot of people. Third problem is that in spite of generating all those false positive, they miss a lot of things. So when a breach happens, why is it that we spend all that money on this system, we didn't catch that thing? Well, it wasn't getting those things, the logs doesn't have that information, etc. In reality, the real reason why these things happen is because all these systems have a tremendous lack of context. And you'll see what I mean by this through this presentation. Why is it that QRadar does that is different from all these systems? Well, QRadar is going to inject into that correlation engine some flows. And what are those flows? Well, first of all, the name. Those are called N flows, that's the Cisco terminology. S flows is a more general terminology. Juniper called them J flows. But nevertheless, all those have been standardized in a format called IPFix, which is an open standard. But what are those? Well, that is layer 4 and layer 2 data. And that really tells you which IP has spoken to which IP over which port over what protocol, and a ton of more information that is available about that session. And in fact, if you Google nflows, you'll see all the level of details that are in there. This is like if you were getting your phone bill, and you see at the end of the phone bill that this number called that number, and the conversation lasted that amount of time. We inject that into correlation, and that allows us to see, well, what traffic is going to China, and what is input traffic, what is an output traffic, and things like that, and what type of traffic that was. We also have something that we call QFlow, which is, this is layer 7 data. We take the first 64 bytes of every packet that goes in there, and inspect it and see what type of information is flowing to this session. And this is like if you were getting the same phone bill as you get before, with all the who called what, but also like if you were getting a transcript of the beginning of the conversation on every one of those calls, which is very useful. And this allows us, for example, to see things like an APT, a botnet. Malware installs some content in a particular device, and that device phones home, and well, we can see that that's chat traffic. And what's inside the chat traffic? Well, that's the typical command and control type of conversation. That's how we can detect those type of things. There's also one more flow that we add into the picture, and that's called B flow. When you do virtualization, many of the conversations that will go through normal routers and switches, it doesn't go that way anymore because it goes through the hypervisor. And if you don't have that vFlow capability, you will be missing all that rich flows. But we don't, because we precisely have that. So we add that into the correlation engine, and that allows us to really get a great deal of detail. But we also have something else. We have an asset database that we also use to feed data into the correlation. What are the things that we put into that asset database? Well, for once, QRadar has the capability of automatically, without you telling it about it, it has an automatic detection capability of all the devices. In fact, you install the system, define where your DMZ is, that's how our POCs goes, and then you let the system listen to stuff for a while. So you look for devices and services, and it can detect, for example, oh, there's a DNS traffic, because the way that the DNS operates, that's a DHCP server over there. Oh, look, there's an FTP server sending traffic there. Here is a mail server. And what that allows us to do is provide some of that context that is being missing also, besides the flows. Because, for example, if we see a workstation that is sending a ton of mail, well, that might be that that workstation has been compromised and is being used as part of a spam content. But in this asset database, one other piece that we add is user information. QRadar, because it inspects all the traffic in detail, can see, for example, when a user logs in into Active Directory or in any particular web application. It sees when it does the login, and attach that information into the asset database. So whenever we report about an incident, we not only say that this is IP whatever, we say that at the moment of the incident, that IP was used by Mr. Smith, or whatever, the user ID of the person. We also add into that asset database IPS data. Not only the stuff that your IPS, in particular, we have very tight integration with our IPS, the IPS data, the things that it blocks, but also very rich IPFix information from the IPS. This is really, really, really a key differentiator. So that rich application information, for example, in the case of Facebook, allows us to see, well, that guy is not only using Facebook, but also is posting data. This is the nature of the things that the guy is actually posting. So this really increases and gives the level of context that is really remarkable. We also get data from our prime mechanism of protecting database, which is Guardian. So everything that Guardian blocks or give us a warning about somebody accessing something that they probably are not supposed to, or just blocked that attempt, that information is passed to QRadar, and that's very important for us to detect, again, APTs or any kind of abnormal behavior. We also get data from something that is very rare on these SIEM systems, but it's very important, the mainframe. This is essential for many corporations, that most of the data is there, the critical systems are there, and yet that is missing into the correlation. So we not only can bring the data from the mainframe into our correlation engine, but we can also, with CSecure, we can actually tell CSecure, well, notify me about the specific things. These are specific things that I'm going to be watchful on the mainframe. So instead of getting all that information, you just get a subset of the things that you wanted to be alerted about. Same thing that we do with Guardian, we do it with the mainframe. We also add into this asset database IP reputation. So we have the X-Force has a very well-known capability of researching everything that goes out there, and that combined with the data that we get from all the almost 4,000 customers that we have their network hosted. So we get to know a lot of things that are happening out there. So whenever there are botnets operating that are injecting malware, well, we get to know what those IPs are across the world. We have centers all over the world, and so we know when that thing is happening. We also have a very large crawler in Germany that allows us to detect spam sites and anonymous proxies that can alert you and say, well, what is that people hiding their identity through an anonymous proxy? So that may give some context for an investigation. We also feed into that scanner IP. So the bad guys use scans the network to find vulnerabilities, to find devices here to exploit here and there. So when we get some scanning traffic coming from a famous IP that is being used for that, so we provide that additional context, and we don't only talk about the individual addresses, but we work with dynamic IP ranges. You see, the bad guys switch the IP's address that they use, and they use some IP address for scanning or for attacking. So what we do is that, well, we know that within this range of IPs, those are the ones used by those guys. And we also add spam sites and lots of other bad guys into that IP reputation feed. So that provides a tremendous level of context as well. We provide information also from our identity management and our access management components, and that gives us a lot of info also as well. And we feed data from vulnerability scanners like Nessus, Qualys, Rapid7, basically every reputable vulnerability scanner. We take the data in it. But we recently released an addition to QRadar we call it QVM, QRadar Vulnerability Manager. And you may say, well, why do if I have a good scanner, why do I need another? Well, this is not another scanner. Even though it has the same capability, nothing to envy on the very best scanners out there with, PCI certify, and we do, all the things that they do. But let me tell you what we do better. So, and this is actually the first technology in the market to bring this capability. So we get the network, and the OSs, the services, scan, all that good stuff that a top quality scanner does. We also get misconfigurations of the devices. We feed that information into the correlation. But we do things like, for example, because with our Qflow, we can detect when a new device comes into the network. Well, at that moment, we got a new device, scan it. Don't wait until the next cycle, because you scan some people scan every quarter, some people scan every month, and some people may even scan every week. But if I get a new device or a device that gets changed and behaves now as an SNMP server, why is that? I mean, why do I have to wait until the next scan to figure it out? Probably by the time that the next scan runs, that device will be taken out by the bad guy, so I will miss all that. Well, not in our case, because as soon as we detect that the new device exists by that automatic detection that I mentioned before, then we scan it immediately. The other thing that we do is that we have an early warning system. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say that you have scanned your network, you're up to date, but now we get a feed from the X-Force or a feed from CVA, so where there are new vulnerabilities discovered, like for example Java. Some people joke that Java stands for just another vulnerability announcement. So we get a new Java vulnerability. What do I know? What I'm have to worry about? Well, in our asset database, we have all that information, and we know which devices uses, for example, that Java has Java installed. So we tell the QRadar administrator, well, these systems really now, because of this new vulnerability, they are in trouble, and you need to do something about it. We also, from Risk Manager, which I will talk a little bit later, we get topology information, which allows us to see clearly on a map. Say, well, there is a direct path between that possible attacker and that device that I have. So I have to be extra careful. I don't have anything that is protecting me in between, and that's actually very useful from a visual standpoint. We also have the capability to scan from the outside our DMZ. Now there's a module on QRadar that you can actually put in a RAC 7 Rackspace or Amazon's cloud provider, and that allows us to scan your DMZ from the outside, which gives you a perspective you will not get from the inside, and that may reveal some additional vulnerabilities. That's actually something very nice. We also, you see, we have a sophisticated NBAT. So that detects bad behavior, that detects strange things, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But whenever we see that it's a suspicious device, let's say that this device was a database server and right now is sending SNMP data to outside the company, and that's going to, let's say, Singapore, Korea, China, etc. Why is that? Is that something normal? Well, when I detect something suspicious, one of the things that we can do is actually scan that device and see what has changed in there since the last scan. The other thing that we do is that all these vulnerabilities travels with the user. So it knows in the asset database, because it has that user information context, which is very rich. So when you log in as a VPN instead of going to the standard network, well, we know that's the same device, even though the IP address is different. So it's a lot of intelligence built around that. We also get into Vulnerability Manager all the information about the IPS, what is being blocked by an IPS. So that's very, very, very interesting, because we know what are the things that, in spite of me being vulnerable to that attack, well, your IPS is doing a good job and is blocking that, so you don't have to worry about those. We also get into QVM AppScam data, which is a sophisticated, normally these scanners do some initial job on scanning applications, but nothing like AppScan like that. It's also a much level of detail. That information is fed into QVM. We still get and will always be getting information from other scanners. So if you have your investment done in that way, that you can feed that into QVM. We take input from BigFix. So we know what the endpoint is and what the vulnerabilities of the endpoint, what are the patches that have been applied to the endpoint, and that you see that's very useful. And Guardium does a very good job in detecting vulnerabilities on the databases, misconfigurations on the databases, the registry of the machine with the database is messed up, is strange. So we feed all that information. And what that allows us to do is to get into the QVM view, or the tab that we added for QRadar. We can do, for example, instead of seeing that overwhelming list of vulnerabilities that I don't even know where to begin to patch, what is relevant, what should I do? There are thousands of vulnerabilities, I cannot fix them all. Where should I start up with? Well, for once, because we have Qflow, that we have all that intelligence in the network, we see what's active and what's inactive, and we can see that, oh yeah, you have a bunch of vulnerabilities here and there that you should fix at some point, but guess what? Those things are inactive in the current system. So you don't have to worry about it. Just relax on those vulnerabilities. There's nothing that you need to know like right now as a top priority. We also get in there information about what are the things that have been, for example, patched. For example, from BigFix or any other endpoint manager that you have, it tells us what are the things that it patched. So don't worry about those vulnerabilities, because those are being patched. So relax. Now, what happened with what information do we get from our firewalls and our IPSs? Well, precisely, we now get information. Say, well, all those things had been blocked. Your application has a vulnerability to do this particular type of SQL injection. Well, guess what? Your IPS with the PAM module, for example, blocks that type of attack. So don't worry about those. And then left you with a couple of things that let you know that you are at risk. There's something that you need to do about them. With the feeds, as I said before, from the X4s, we know what the vulnerabilities are, CVEs, we get all that fresh data. And those are things that are exposed there, are ready for people to attack you, and so do something about those. And more important even than that is that because we have a network anomaly detection capability, we can tell you, well, not only you have a vulnerability, but my friend, unfortunately, that machine has been compromised, that system has been exploited. So let's pause for a second here and talk about the rest of the components that are in this part of this security intelligence.